Alright, ladies and gentlemen, just a while back, PRYDWEN finally released their Genshin tier list. I never thought they were going to do this. I thought we were going to be using Game 8 forever, but here it is. Now, for those of you who don't know, PRYDWEN has basically since the beginning of HSR been like the premium tier list website and the character builds website, stuff like that. I'm sure a lot of us in Genshin have used Game 8 for quite a while, but yeah, in HSR, this has been like the go-to. And, you know, I've made many tier list videos on both Genshin as well as HSR. Although I've never, like, used another tier list website as a reference, I will sometimes discuss them. For example, in my HSR tier list videos, I'll be like, oh, PRYDWEN has this unit at tier X, but personally I think they're overrated or underrated. But, you know, this is going to be the first time I'm reacting to a PRYDWEN tier list. It will also be the last time. All of my subsequent thoughts, if they ever update the tier list, you'll find in my own tier list videos, which I do not, like, once every patch. Normally when there's, like, a big shake-up or a couple of new DPSs come out, then I'll do one. So expect one maybe like every 2, sometimes 3 versions. I will make one for 7.0, so you know, I won't be going one by one for every unit where I would place them. This is more of a general reaction. So yeah, with that being said, also for a bit of context, I've been playing Genshin since second half of version 2.7, free to play since February 2023. Before that, you know, I purchased a few Welcome Moons as well as like 2 battle passes out of FOMO, but have not since then. So sober since February 2023. I also clear most Spiral Abysses. I've been a bit jaded when it comes to Genshin endgame recently, so I don't tend to really do the Stygian Onslaughts, and I half-ass Imaginary Theater. But, you know, I'll still do Abyss most of the time. So, you know, I've got quite a lot of experience when it comes to Genshin endgame. Also, I only evaluate units at C0, R0, same how I only do E0, S0 on HSR. Now then, getting into the tier list itself, looking at the tier 0 DPSs, you know, I'd say this is mostly fair enough. You know, Sandrone and Zabai probably like the inarguable top 2 DPSs in the game right now. Although I will say it is interesting that Sandrone is the only stellar DPS in tier 0. Okay, I don't think Mizuki has what it takes right now to go to tier 0, and I doubt that she will unless a really insane stellar swell support comes out, but I doubt it. So, you know, I think 0.5 is fair for her. Sino, I know he is kind of C6 Alyosha and R1 reliant. I think he's more Alyosha reliant than Sandrone is, although I might be mistaken there. You know, correct me if I'm wrong. Then again, I'm not sure if PRYDWEN's actually considering C6 Alyosha, because it is really difficult to get. Like, I know that he's here on the tier list, but when it comes to teams, I believe they're kind of hovering over Escoffier instead of Alyosha, especially if he isn't C6. Maybe Sino in tier 0.5 is fair because they're not considering standard weapons. Sorry, they're not considering signature weapons. So I guess Sino in 0.5 is fair. I also think he is slightly weaker than Wriothesley at C0, R0. But although I definitely do think that Wriothesley is a shout for tier 0. Now, I will say I am a Flynn's and Wriothesley main, so maybe I am slightly biased here. But I definitely do think that Wriothesley should at least be considered for tier 0. You know, first of all, he's not C6 Alyosha dependent. I definitely think that C6 Alyosha is a bit of a hindrance for those who are reliant on him. You know, he uses Nicole as his last slot. You can technically Escoffier is actually the stronger option, and I definitely do think they should be evaluating him with Escoffier instead of Nicole, because although it's only, I believe, like about a 3% DPS increase, a character like, for example, Nefer, if we go ahead and look at her best in slot team, this is the Sucrose team, which is first of all decently difficult to pull off, and also basically a sustainless team because you're running what, like 1 prototype Amber, maybe, if that, yeah, 1 prototype Amber, and then also Mavwika's best in slot team as well, although it is a sustained team. You know, the difference between having her combo down to a nail and not is also pretty different. So I definitely do think that Wriothesley is a shoo-in for tier 0. Maybe you can even put like an expert -1 tag here, considering the fact that we are talking about a sustainers team in which he does drain his own HP. But at the same time, you know, if we look at changelog, it does say why he is in 0.5 instead of 0 as Sandrone, because here it does say compared to Sandrone, and you know, they do kind of fulfill the same role. It is true. He falls short of personal damage, which, you know, is his personal damage that much worse than Sandrone? I'm not all that sure, and the team DPS is certainly quite similar. And then here it says team building flexibility. I'm guessing that's referring to the fact that you can't run a healer with him, to which I say, you know, the same kind of applies for the Nefer team as well. Like if you're running Cookie instead of either Nahida or Sucrose, then it is quite a DPS down as well, sorry, a DPS loss as well. So then the only other thing that I can think of is, you know, the fact that he can't use C6 Alyosha and he has to use someone like Nicole, but then again, like I said, SKF is a better option, and then even then Nicole isn't that bad. So I don't really get this either, and then they also both really rely on Adet as well as Yai. Like, if you take either of them away from them, then they definitely fall down in the tier list. And then finally it says gameplay, in which case, I don't know, are they saying Wriothesley is more boring to play or that he's harder to play? In which case, if he's harder to play, don't you just put him in tier 0 with the expert tag? You know, I don't really get it. So maybe they're waiting for Wriothesley C1 to be available in version 7.1 and then they'll move him up, because, you know, although his C1 isn't a massive increase, you know, it is enough of an increase where it probably puts him closer in line to this tier. I've definitely seen calcs where both Sino as well as Wriothesley out DPS both Nefer and Nicole. Now maybe that's not taking into account the maximum Nefer and Mavika, sorry, not Nefer and Nicole, Nefer and Mavika. Maybe that's not considering their maximum DPS using some of their more sweatier combos, as well as, for example, Nefer's Sucrose team. Or maybe it's considering their signature weapons, I'm not sure. But, you know, I definitely do think that both Sino and Wriothesley are at least competitive enough to be considered, and especially Wriothesley, you know, especially if you don't want to consider C6 Alyosha, which is required for Sandreni's peak performance, if you don't want to consider that, then I definitely do think that Wriothesley definitely deserves to be in the tier 0 tier, just because, like I said, he is not C6 Alyosha dependent. So, you know, if he isn't tier 0 in 7.1, then I genuinely have no clue why. My only guess is that right now they're considering his tier 0 and the little watch list here, which I believe applies to everyone who's getting a constellation available in the selector next version. Yeah, so I think they're looking at how the DPS performance will affect all of those. To which I definitely think Wriothesley does belong in tier 0, especially because his C1 allows him some more final slot options. For example, Beta becomes a better option because of the team flexibility. But then again, like I said, PRYDWEN tends to really consider the best team performance as opposed to their average team performance, which is, like I said, basically the entire reason why Nefer is up here, because if not, then I definitely do think Nefer might be a shout for a tier 0.5, especially if Flynn's went down. You know, I do concede that Flynn's is the worst of the 3 lunar DPSs, but I don't think the difference between him and Nefer's, for example, her sustain team variants, or even her Nahida team variants, I don't think is that huge compared to the Flynn's variant. And I definitely think that Wriothesley is better than those team options. So if you're considering the best in slot team options, like pure peak team performance, then I definitely think that Wriothesley belongs to go up. And if he doesn't, then maybe he deserves tier 0.5, but someone like Nefer also deserves to be going down. So I just personally think that Wriothesley should be in the same tier as Nefer. But yeah, that's it for my Wriothesley rant. I definitely do believe that he deserves to be in tier 0. Other than that, yeah, I think that the tier 0 is mostly correct. You know, I think I wouldn't argue too hard about all of these units being in tier 0. I mean, I guess you can make some arguments for either Nefer or Mavika going down if you don't want to consider they're more difficult to pull off combos. You know, if you want to make this for more casuals, which PRYDWEN tends to do, that's why they kind of consider C0 or R0. But, you know, if you want to just consider free-to-play, but sweaty free-to-play, so where it's C0 or R0, but you are trying to min-max their damage, then, you know, I definitely do think that's fair enough, and I won't be arguing against this. Going on to tier 0.5, I definitely do. Mizuki definitely got a massive upgrade. She went all the way from tier 3 to 0.5, which I think is deserved, although I will say, this is C1 Mizuki, which definitely is a big increase, but I do think her C2 is also enough of an increase. And then right now we also don't have C6 Cryo MC. I think that C1 Mizuki with C2 Cryo MC maybe is more of a tier 1 unit compared to tier 0.5, but she'll move up next patch anyway when her C2 is more accessible, and then we can also get more traveler cons. So, you know, I definitely do think that 0.5 is fair enough. Skirk 0.5, yes. Flynn's, like I said, I think moving him down is fair enough. I'm not gonna argue against it. So yeah, Flynn 0.5, fair enough. Cryo MC 0.5, I feel like the strength of Cryo MC is more so in how many teams they can be in. Although I will say I probably would just keep them to the sub DPS tier, although maybe their main DPS is strong enough to be in 0.5, I'm not all that sure. I just know that their sub DPS teams are very strong. Varka 0.5, I mean, he has some very strong teammates in Prune, Nicole, as well as Duran, so I think that's fair enough. Moving on to the tier 0 Apex tier, I literally think that all of these units are fine. You could make an argument that since Flynn's went down, Nefer should go down as well, but you know, she definitely does have some other teams, whether it be overvape teams or just other wheelchair teams alongside Combina for characters similar to, let's say, a I'd say Chasca. I think Chasca is quite good using Columbina and Nefa as well. So, you know, I think that Flynn is more reliant on the Nefa than the Nefa is on Flynn. So I think keeping tier 0 is fair enough for her. You know, Linnea sub best in slot support for the best in slot DPS in the game. Same for Adet. And then that also applies to both Sino and Wriothesley. So I'd say Adet is actually probably the best of all of these lot, at least in my humble opinion. And then Yaimiko, or actually no, maybe it's, yeah, Yaimiko and Adet are like the two strongest sub DPSs in the entire game. So, you know, I definitely think that this tier 0 is perfectly valid. Although then we move on to tier 0 supports, and I am a bit conflicted because a part of me feels like there isn't really a tier 0 support in the game. You know, back in the day we had Farina, where she was best in slots for so many teams. And then if you go over to HSR, you know, characters like, for example, Morton X Blade, he's best in slot for so many teams. We don't really have that in Genshin. First of all, I don't think Shivers should be tier 0. You know, she's a slight downgrade in Mavika teams. She doesn't really elevate her. You're not going to be running her with literally any of these other units, because what, are you going to run Shivers and Varka double Pyro without an Electro? You're not going to do that. And then next up, I guess, is Varessa as well as Arlecchino, but these are both tier 1 units. So considering the fact that she's a downgrade to a tier 0 unit compared to both her Citlali team as well as her Mona team, as well as the fact that then her next two best units are tier 1, I definitely think that Shivers should probably be 0.5. Citlali, she is best in slot for Mavika. She's also very competitive for someone like, for example, Skark, and then she's also solid for like Arlecchino melt teams, and then, you know, I guess Neverlet teams as well, but, you know, he's kind of, you know, Neverlet's down here now, so I wouldn't really consider that as much. So I think Citlali tier 0 is good enough, but, you know, I wouldn't say that, oh yeah, she's an OP support. I'd say that she's probably, so yeah, I guess tier 0 is fair enough. Iansan tier 0, I mean, best in slot for Mavika in both, in basically all of her teams, whether it be Overload, Melt with Citlali, or if it's the Mona variant, use Iansan in all of those. So I think Iansan's fair enough, and then also best in slot for Varessa as well. So, you know, I think I'd just about say that Iansan deserves to be tier 0. Lauma, I mean, best in slot for Nefer, not many other teams, but, you know, good enough in, for example, like an Alhaitham Hyperbloom team, sorry, Quick Bloom team, that, okay, yeah, I think tier 0 is fair enough. Mona tier 0, especially at C2, I'm not quite sure. They moved her up. I think 0.5 was more of a fair placement, because you're what? You're a side grade to Mavika, I'm pretty sure. Like, I'm pretty sure her Citlali team is still better. I mean, if we go ahead and press on Mavika here and go to the teams and synergies, we see that the Citlali version is calced at 100%, whereas the Mona one is a 3% downgrade. So, you know, I wouldn't call this a downgrade, I'd call this more of a side grade, and it's also similar to the Overload teams. So yeah, I'd say Mona is a side grade for Mavika, and then I don't know what other unit you're considering her for, you know, not Nefer, not Sandrane, not Zabai, not Sino, not Flynn's. Skark, she's just a downgrade for, because, you know, you're not really able to get a second Hexarite character in, you know, not CMC, not CryoMC. Varka, his Hydro teams suck. Maybe Vodinitsu will change that, but for the time being, Mona isn't good with Varka. And then, you know, not Wriothesley, not Mizuki. And then next, you're looking at Arlecchino, because then you're not looking at Kenichi, you're not looking at Lohen, you're not looking at Varessa. I guess you're looking at Mulani as well. I'm not 100% sure what the Mulani team they're using here is. You know, it's not mentioned. And if I go ahead and go to the Mona stats, you know, it also doesn't mention Mulani here. So I'm guessing it's Arlecchino and Mavika and Mulani that they're considering here. But once again, considering that she's a side grade to Mavika, and then the other two units are tier 1, similar to Shivers, I think that Mona goes down to 0.5. Maybe if this was C4 Mona, you could say tier 0, but then again, I wouldn't really call C4 Mona all that relatable, so I definitely think that the C2 baseline is fair. Next up, we have Nicole. She does have a little watch list icon here, and I believe that's to move her down, because, you know, she can't go up anywhere, and she's not getting, like, any new teammates or any new constellations. So I think this is more so looking at the fact that, okay, she is a... I think she fell off as an option for Sandrane, I'm pretty sure. I think you just rather use Escoffier, and you can actually use Escoffier's ult there, so it's not a sustainers team. Wriothesley, she is best in slot, 4th option for when looking at sustain, but then again, going back to the argument of, for example, Nefer, you're looking at sustainless, so I think for Wriothesley it is fair enough to pick Escoffier over Nicole. So, you know, then obviously she is best in slot for example, Varka. I believe it is for Arlecchino as well. No, actually no, it's calced with Bennett instead. That's interesting. Maybe maybe Nicole will be better here, I'm not sure, or maybe Bennett is just better. So yeah, once again, she's supporting a tier 0.5 unit, best in slot sustain, but not best in slot 4th slot for another 0.5 unit. And then you're looking at tier 1 units, so I'd honestly say Nicole might be more of a tier 0.5 unit, and then Sucrose in tier 0, yeah, that's fair enough, you know, best in slot for Nefer, best in slot for, she's actually best in slot for Wriothesley as well, but it's about a 1% difference with SKF, and I think she is so competitive, so, yeah, she's wanted in so many teams that I think it's fair, and then also, you know, Flynn's team as well, so, yeah, I think Sucrose in tier 0 is deserved, but, you know, I don't think there's a single support in the game where I'm like, oh my god, this unit is omega broken. Obviously, that used to be Bennett. Bennett used to be D tier 0 support. You know, it used to be Bennett Farina. But then now that these teams don't really, you know, they're kind of replacing general supports with niche supports. To the fact that nowadays there are tier 0 sub DPS, but I don't think there's many tier 0 supports in the game. But yeah, once again, I've already given my thoughts on some of the units that deserve to go down. Moving on to the tier 0.5 sub DPSs as well. You know, Duran, fair enough. SKF, good enough. You know, I definitely think that she was hanging on by a thread because Skirk was hanging on by a thread. But now that she has all of the stellar teams as well, I definitely think that 0.5 is deserved. Maybe you can even make an argument for tier 0. Official, fair enough. Just the core with Duran or Nicole is so strong that I definitely think that 0.5 is fair enough. Chevrolet as well. Crow MC, yep, I think this is fair. If we get C6, maybe there's an argument for her, for them to go up to tier 0. Alyosha C6, yep, fair enough. Bennett, yes, this pains me. You know, but like I said, you know, they've just been releasing so many more niche supports that are best in slot that Bennett has definitely gone down. You know, the only one here who really uses him is Mavwika. Other than that, it's Varka. But then again, Varka, I'm pretty sure you just prefer using Duran Nicole anyway. So, you know, it is tough times for Bennett. First time, genuinely, I think version 7 is the first time since the game's release that this guy has gone down from tier 0. Eluga C6, yep, fair enough. Prune, yep, fair enough. Chi-Chi C2, I mean, I guess I'd probably just rather use SKFA than Chi-Chi if I'm being honest. I find more value in SKFA, and then also, for example, for someone like Razi, you just rather use Nicole. But yeah, I guess it's fair enough, which is crazy to think about. This used to be the tier 5 unit, now to go up to tier 0.5 is crazy to think about. But yeah, I think that there's just other units I'd rather use. Anyway, moving on to the meta tier. I want to kind of cover this all in one go. I think these are all fair enough. Yeah, I think Molani deserves tier 1 instead of tier 0 or 0.5 in my humble opinion. But hey, maybe people would say that's skill issue from my part. Yeah, Veressa, fair enough. Lohan, fair enough. Rest in peace, this poor guy. I do think he's one of the more irrelevant characters in the entire game. He basically had like half a version to shine, I suppose. Kanich as well. You know, yeah, I think all of these are fair enough. Meta characters, you know, Farina holding on just about, I think fair enough. You know, she is still best in slot for Skirk, and then she's a decent generalist option. And then I think these are actually also good shouts. I will say, I am very confused as to why Albedo is here. I don't know who you're playing Albedo with. I don't think you're playing Albedo with literally any character in tier 1. Maybe a character in tier 1.5, but even then I don't know who. Like, Double Geo Neuvillette, maybe? I don't know, I'm confused. What is Albedo's best in slot team? You know, if I press on him, it doesn't give me a best in slot team. Are they just evaluating him on individual strength? Which I don't really think has merit in a game like Genshin, which is so team dependent. So, you know, that is a bit confusing to me. But yeah, Mavika, decent sub DPS for options like, for example, Veressa or just other melt or overload shenanigans. Or on basically same niche as Mavika, kind of tied to the hip if you're running them as sub DPSs. I know, I mean, sure, if you're running a second stellar team, she's not the best. Sorry, she's not the worst option, so fair enough, I guess. C6 Farazan, I mean, she's what? Like, Sucrose, I think, side grade for both Mizuki as well as Varka teams. And then, you know, obviously her niche of Zhao is fallen off a cliff, so I'd say maybe 1.5 instead of tier 1, although maybe I'm being too harsh. Nahida is here basically just because of, I think just because of Nefer. which then again, she isn't even the best in slot Nefer option. She, like I said, she's like worse than Sucrose, but then again, if Sucrose is being used somewhere else, then I guess you want to use Nahida if you're not looking to run sustain, so I guess it's fair enough. Maybe 1.5 instead of tier 1, but okay, sure, fair enough, tier 1. Shalon moving down, same tier as Farina, I definitely think is fair enough. Tier 1.5, I think all of this also is fair enough, although I will say one thing that is crazy to me is how is Chasca in tier 2? Like what? In what world is Chasca the same tier as Ito? What Ito team are they calcing here? Like, once again, if I press them, they don't give me a best in slot team. Like, I definitely think that this has been one of the biggest points of contention when the tiers came out, and this is very, very confusing to me. Like, is this meant to be like a Columbina, Linnea, or a Lugo or Chiori wheelchair for Ito, in which case you can just slap on, for example, Columbina and Nefa for his Chasca, and it's basically the same thing, if not better. And then she also has just way more team options. You literally have the flexible tag here, which Ito doesn't have, so you know you can assume cryo stuff for her with, I don't know, Shenhe Setlali or with Escoffier. You know, there's a lot of decent cryo sub DPSs here. Or like I said earlier, you can do Lunar Child stuff, or you can do some Hexerize stuff. I'm very confused as to why Chasca is in the same tier as Ito. I also don't know why Ito is in a higher tier than Alhaitham. I think Alhaitham, you know, with how prevalent Dendro stuff is, for example, just think about that Dendro crab boss, which if you don't have Nefer, the game basically gives you a massive middle finger. You know, Alhaitham is a decent option for that boss as well as whenever you need Dendro in the Abyss. You know, you can still technically run him in a Quick Bloom team with, for example, Farina alongside either Nahida or Baiju and then and then Cookie, or instead of Farina you can run Columbina, Lauma, Cookie, or you can do a hybrid with Farina, Lauma, Cookie, and all of those are decent options and they will do solidly for your Dendro needs. Or if you want to go full wheelchair, you can do Columbina, Lauma, and Nefa. Which, yeah, I see no reason as to why Alhaitham should be below Ito as well. Higher personal DPS, should be higher team DPS as well. It's very confusing to me. I think both Alhaitham as well as Chasca belong in tier 1.5. Like I said, I have no clue what Ito's done here to get up to tier 2. There has to be some massive Ito fan. I love Ito, by the way. I just think that this guy has been meta relevant for a very, very, very long time. Moving on to 1.5 sub DPS characters, but yeah, basically I think all of these are fair enough, and I don't think these guys getting constellations will move them up whatsoever, so yeah, I think they will probably just stay in tier 1.5, which is sad because I remember when the Fontaine cast was rated much higher, but you know, then again, it is 3 years later nearly, so I guess it is fair enough. Beidou, you know, nice to see her here. Chiori, Emily, I mean, I guess you know, tier 1.5 is kind of where you don't really have a single best in slot team, and I think these are fair placements for these kind of units. Arguably, someone like Albedo should move down here as well. Shangling, yeah. Xingqiu, yeah, they both kind of fell down. Same with Yelan. Venti, sure, I suppose. Decent option for Varka teams. Other than that, I'm not quite sure. Other than that, I think you probably just run a main DPS. But yeah, I guess 1.5 for Venti is fair enough. Alyosha C2 tier 1.5, yeah, it's really not the best. Diona, I think I prefer Beidou and Chi-Chi to Diona, but I mean, sure, I guess C6 Goro is an okay option for Zabai teams, so that's basically the only thing keeping him here. It's definitely not Ito. If you're running Goro with Ito, I don't know what's going on there. C2 Iluga, I mean, yeah, I suppose Yehoda also isn't the most meta-relevant character. You know, 1.5, it says meta, but basically, what... Tier 1, I suppose, is meta, but once you get to 1.5, it's kind of more meta-relevant. Shenhe, you know, decent option for Skirk. I think Shenhe deserves tier 1. If Nahida and Shalonen are tier 1, I think Shenhe deserves tier 1. Nilo, C1 as well. Yeah, I think that's fair enough. Some Neferteam Jazz. Other than that, you know, not best. Prune C2, yeah, I suppose. I don't know much about Prune, to be honest. Kaza C0. I think if Nicole... Sorry, actually, to be fair, I guess Shalonen has the Mavika team, which is why she's one place above Kazuha. But then again, Kazuha does have more utility, where, for example, if you need grouping, then I definitely do think that Kazuha goes ahead. But I guess 1.5 is fair. Literally, when I started playing the game was right before Kazuha's rerun, and that's when everyone was being like, guys, we were wrong about Kazuha in 1.6. This is the most OP unit in the entire game. Pull him, he is a must pull. And they were right. This guy carried for so long. It is a bit of a shame to see where he has ended up now. Zhongli, he's actually a decent option compared to Nicole for Wriothesley. I'm pretty sure the difference between Wriothesley's Nicole variant as well as either his Beidou variant or his Zhongli variant at C1 is the same as his C0 and his C1, which is even more reason why I think that when you get his C1, he definitely is a shoo-in for tier 0, if not already a shoo-in for it. But anyway, I've spoken long enough about that. Tier 2, you know, like I said, definitely deserves to go up. I think Alhaitham also should be a tier 1 unit. Other than here, you're basically getting into mostly irrelevant characters. You know, Wriothesley, I'm pretty sure is even better in freeze than Ayek is right now with Escoffier, although maybe I'm mistaken. Although, especially when his C1 becomes baseline. Xiao, I feel so bad. First of all, they killed his plunge niche with Varessa, and then you could cope and say, you know, at least he's still a strong animal character. Then boom, Varka released. Then you could say, you know, at least he's one of the strongest AoE DPS in the game, alongside someone like Neuvillette. And then boom, Mizuki becomes a tier 0.5. Xiao is homeless. I'm sorry to say it. I love Xiao. The only cosplay I've ever owned was a Xiao. Shout out to those of you who remember me cosplaying Xiao when pulling for Xiao. But then again, I never got a C6 Farazan, so I basically never used him. They don't even have his best in slot team listed, so I don't even know what his best in slot team is. But yeah, I definitely think that Xiao is just kind of a homeless character. You know, he was definitely doing better than Wanderer for a very long time, but now I'd say they're probably both in the same tier. Razor, same tier as Raiden, I think is fair enough. I feel very bad for Raiden fans, but yeah, it's true. Like I said, Ayaka, I do think has fallen off as well quite a bit. Maybe Ito belongs in here, but someone like Chasca as well as Alhaitham definitely belong in 1.5, at least in my opinion. Tier 2, Cookie. I think Cookie, like, I think Llama was strong enough for Hyper Boom that you could consider Cookie 1.5. Fair enough. Rosaria, I really don't know who you're using her with. Kokomi is basically just a heal bot. I also don't know who you're using her with. Okay, at this point we're getting to characters which are pretty irrelevant, in which case I guess we just go ahead and look at the off-meta tier. I already said Alhaitham, I think that belongs higher. Diluc, fair enough. Gaoyu, fair enough. Yoimiya, kinda high. I actually think that Tainari might be slightly low. Also, Aito. Before, I was a Wriothesley and Flynn's main. A lot of my content was on Aito, especially back in version 4. You know, most of my content was Aito as well as Wriothesley. I think in version 4, Aito was actually really underrated. You know, he was a very solid Hyper Bloom unit. Run him alongside Nahida, Beidou, Cookie. It was actually a very solid version 4 team. And then when Farina came around and that kind of power creep came up, he actually benefited from it. Because Mono Hydro Aito, let me tell you right now, Farina plus Yelan plus a 4th slot, whether that be Shalom was the best one when that came. I was even using Aito in version 5. This unit was so underrated in my opinion. Everyone hated on him. He only became homeless when Nodcry came around. Like in late Natlan when DPS numbers went up, like when there was power creep in the Abyss. And then in Nodcry was the nail in the coffin for him when I guess Luna Charge became a decent option for him, but then you just had much better options in Luna Charge anyway, to the point that, you know, Aito just kind of fell off. And then, you know, we got all the power creep in Nodcry. But yeah, I think Aito was a honestly decent unit. If you look at my tier list before this, I kept vouching for Aito. You know, I wasn't placing him very high, but I was placing him in kind of like the tier 2 region as well. But now I think, okay, tier 4 is probably kind of fair enough. Then again, if you want to run him as a Luna Charge driver, arguably he is competitive with these tier 3 units, if not some of the tier 2 units. Like, I don't think he's that much worse than Wanderer or Xiao, but you know, that's my Aito glaze for the day done. Eula, yeah, fell off at release. Tartag, you know, he just hasn't gotten the team upgrades that you want. Do they have a best in slot team for him? No, they don't, and honestly kind of deserved. Probably, I don't know who's running him. Hazo is a driver, yeah, sure, I guess. Animo drivers will never be bad. Kaching, tier 4, yeah, fair enough. Dea C2 as a DPS, she needs C6 to be even barely tier 2. It's kind of sad. You know, I was there when all the Dea controversy came out. It was about 3.5 or 3.6 when I first started getting burnt out on Genshin, and then Fontaine really brought me back in. Actually, to be fair, that's Yap. This video's going on for long enough. I should probably try to close it out. I don't know why any of these units here. I mean, Kaya, I guess. I mean, okay, Toma for Burgeon, sure. Kaya for double cryo melt stuff, for example, for Arlecchino. Okay, fair enough. Barbara, who are you running Barbara with? On-field Hyper Bloom sustain? Don't make me laugh. Baiju, tier 3, I mean, I guess, you know, his best in slot team is probably Alhaitham still. You know, he used to be a decent fanfare generator for Farina, but then again, I think after Shenyun released, you just rather use Shenyun because she can actually hold VV. So yeah, I think Baiju kinda not necessary either. Then again, like I said, I literally in Nodcry, I was like, I don't know, I'm not talking about early Nodcry, I'm talking about I think it was Luna 7 or Luna 6, whenever it was the Nefer rerun and they put the crab back in the abyss. My team was Alhaitham, Farina, Baiju, Cookie, and I cleared it. So, yeah, arguably Baiju should go up to tier 2 and Alhaitham up to tier 1.5, but, you know, whatever. Just because, like I said, I think there's quite a lot of Lunar Bloom shill, and when that does happen, I actually do think that they're a decent option. Actually, I think I used Columbina instead of, yeah, I'm pretty sure I used Columbina instead of Farina, and then I gave Ino to my Flynn's team just because my Flynn's team is C1, so they're strong enough. Anyway, that's enough. Yeah, I actually do have those posted, but they're unlisted videos. If I remember, I'll maybe link them down below. That's my justification for Alhaitham being higher. Anyway, all of these units that are kind of irrelevant, I guess you can just shove them in tier 3. These are even more irrelevant units. Honestly, shove Cedrine down. Why are you even giving her a watch list? Her C1 changes nothing. Shove her down with Electro Traveler. I've never used Electro Traveler in my life. There were people who were like, oh, Electro Traveler is a decent battery. I have never felt the need to use them. Then again, I've also never felt the need to use Geo Traveler. I don't think Zavai made them any more relevant. I don't know why they were in tier 3 in the first place. I don't know why Anno Traveler is up in here either, to be fair. I used them as my main DPS back in, like, version 2. Before I got Hazo and then I got Diluc. So I don't know why they're up here either. Dendro Traveler I can still kind of understand for some Hyperloom stuff. Actually, Mika isn't a bad fanfare generator for Farina and Cryo teams, so actually I think this is maybe a bit harsh. Other than that, yeah, I think all of this is fair enough. All of this is pretty fair enough. Although I do think Tainari maybe deserves to go up, same for example, Ayato. And then tier 5, yeah, these units are kind of homeless. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the PRYDWEN tier list. I will have my own tier list out in probably the next week or two. I just need to get some Honkai Star Rail stuff done, as well as do the new Abyss reset when that comes out. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on the PRYDWEN tier list. As a quick summary, what would I change? Some of these supports I think deserve to go down to 0.5. I think this is basically perfect. Wriothesley I think deserves to be in tier 0 either now with an expert tag or in 7.1 when his C1 is unlockable, and then he deserves to be tier 0. I don't think he's very far behind Sandrone, and in some situations I think he's better than these two. So Wriothesley definitely belongs up in tier 0, maybe even Sino, but definitely Wriothesley. Then again, I'll touch on that more when I do my own tier list. Other than that, I think this is fair enough. Although, like I said, I do think Chasca belongs to be up in 1.5, and so does Alhaitham. Other than that, that's basically most of the changes I would do. Other stuff, like, for example, I think Albedo should go down, stuff like that. But hey, let me know if I'm wrong. Let me know why you think characters don't deserve the upgrades or downgrades I said. Let me know if there's any own disagreements you have with this tier list. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys next time. See ya.